Hamilton and Verstappen just did something Formula One almost never sees. They pushed the FIA toward an official complaint, and what investigators found inside Mercedes may be far more dangerous than a simple racing dispute. Because this is not just about one team. This is about trust. The same trust that tells every driver the car beside them is legal. The same trust that tells every fan the result on track is real. The same trust that keeps Formula One from becoming a sport where every sudden burst of speed looks suspicious. And here is the part that makes this terrifying. If the FIA found something illegal, Mercedes could face a storm that changes everything. But if the FIA found something technically legal, yet powerful enough to frighten its rivals, the problem may be even bigger. Because then every team has to ask the same question. Did Mercedes break the rules, or did they find a weakness in the rules before anyone else? Hamilton knows how serious that question is. Verstappen knows it too. And when two of the most powerful voices in modern Formula One are connected to the same complaint, the paddock does not ignore it. It starts looking for the truth. Because if Mercedes was hiding an advantage, the consequences could shake the grid. But if Mercedes was simply smarter than everyone else, the FIA may have discovered something even more uncomfortable. The rulebook itself may have a blind spot. Subscribe to the channel. The first thing to understand is that an official complaint in Formula One is never just a complaint. It is a signal. It tells the paddock that someone powerful believes the normal explanations are not enough. It tells the FIA that the whispers, the doubts, and the uneasy glances around the garages have become serious enough to put on record. And when Hamilton and Verstappen are connected to the same concern, the entire story changes shape. Because these are not two drivers who usually need the same answer. They come from different worlds inside the sport. Different teams. Different histories. Different fan bases. Different emotional wounds. When Hamilton speaks, people hear experience, legacy, and years of understanding how Formula One power really works. When Verstappen speaks, people hear force, certainty, and the instinct of a driver who knows when something on track does not feel right. So if both names become part of the same official pressure, the paddock does not treat it like noise. It treats it like a warning. And that warning pointed toward Mercedes. That is where the tension begins. Because Mercedes is not just another team being questioned after a strange weekend. Mercedes is one of the most watched operations in the entire sport. Every upgrade is photographed. Every bodywork change is discussed. Every sudden improvement in pace is pulled apart by rivals who want to know whether Mercedes found performance, or found a loophole. That does not mean guilt. It means attention. In Formula One, attention follows power. The more successful a team has been, the less innocent every surprise looks to the outside world. A small team can bring a clever idea and be praised for creativity. But when Mercedes brings something unusual, the reaction is sharper. People ask how. Then they ask why. Then they ask whether the FIA already knew. That is the dangerous chain. Because once suspicion enters Formula One, it spreads faster than a car on fresh tires. One engineer notices something. One rival team asks a question. One driver says the car behaved strangely around them. One official inspection finds something that needs more explanation. And suddenly, the story is no longer about one race. It becomes about trust. That is why this Mercedes situation feels so unsettling. The source material does not specify the exact part, system, or technical detail the FIA found, so the honest version of the story cannot pretend to know what is still unclear. But the absence of detail does not make the story weaker. It makes the uncertainty louder. Because Formula One fans know how these things start. They rarely begin with a clean confession or a dramatic reveal. They begin with doubt. A strange performance jump. A car behaving differently. Rivals asking questions in private before the public ever hears a word. Then the FIA steps in, and the whole sport holds its breath. That is what makes an official complaint so powerful. It turns private suspicion into a public problem. And for Mercedes, that is brutal. Because even before the FIA gives a complete answer, the team is forced into a defensive position. Not necessarily because it has done something wrong, but because in Formula One, being investigated changes how people look at you. Every lap becomes evidence. Every speed advantage becomes suspicious. Every quiet moment in the garage feels like it might be hiding something. That is the cost of being at the center of a technical storm. And Mercedes knows this better than most. The team has lived through years where rivals studied every detail of its car, because beating Mercedes was not just about beating a driver. It was about understanding a system that once looked almost impossible to break. So when a complaint drags Mercedes back under the FIA microscope, the old feeling returns. The feeling that somewhere inside the car, inside the procedures, inside the interpretation of the rules, there may be an answer everyone else missed. That is where the word terrifying becomes important. Not because the source confirms a dramatic illegal device. It does not. But because what the FIA might find in a situation like this can be terrifying in several different ways. If the FIA finds something illegal, the danger is obvious. The team could face consequences. Results could be questioned. Rivals could demand accountability. The entire competitive order could be shaken. But if the FIA finds something legal, yet clever enough to frighten rivals, that can be just as dangerous. Because then the problem is not Mercedes breaking the rulebook. The problem is Mercedes understanding the rulebook better than everyone else. And in Formula One, that may be even more frightening. A banned part can be removed. A penalty can be served. A rule breach can be punished. But a legal idea that exposes a weakness in the rules can spread across the grid. It can force the FIA to clarify the regulations. It can send rival teams into panic. It can change development paths, budgets, upgrades, and future races. That is why teams fear gray areas. A gray area is not fully legal in spirit, not clearly illegal in wording, and impossible to ignore once one team finds speed inside it. Think of it like a school exam where every student is told they can bring one sheet of notes. Most students bring a normal page. But one student folds the paper in a way that technically follows the rule, while holding far more information than anyone expected. Did they cheat? Maybe not. Did they change the meaning of the rule? Absolutely. That is Formula One engineering. Teams search for the folded paper. They look for the sentence everyone else read too quickly. They look for the gap between what the rule says and what the rule was meant to prevent. They look for performance hiding in plain sight. And when Mercedes is suspected of finding that kind of gap, rivals become nervous immediately. Because Mercedes does not need a huge advantage to change a race. In Formula One, tiny margins can become massive consequences. A little more stability under braking can protect tires. A little more straight-line efficiency can make overtakes easier. A little better control through a corner can turn defense into dominance. A small advantage on paper can become a race-changing weapon in the hands of a great driver. That is why the FIA's discovery matters, even before the final answer is clear. It tells the paddock that something needed explaining. And in Formula One, the need for explanation is often enough to start a war of suspicion. Hamilton's connection to this story makes it even more complicated. Because Hamilton is not just an outsider looking at Mercedes. His history with the team is deep. His legacy is tied to the silver machinery, to years of success, pressure, strategy, dominance, and heartbreak. So any serious question around Mercedes carries emotional weight for him in a way it would not for most drivers. He understands how that team works. He understands how performance can be found in tiny details. He also understands how quickly a technical question can become a reputational threat. For Verstappen, the emotional meaning is different. Mercedes represents the giant he had to face, the benchmark he had to beat, the machine that once defined what domination looked like in the sport. So when Verstappen is connected to a complaint involving Mercedes, it does not feel like random frustration. It feels like a champion challenging a system he has spent years trying to overcome. That is why the story pulls people in. Not because the full verdict is already known, but because the combination of names creates a sense that something bigger is hiding beneath the surface. Hamilton, Verstappen, Mercedes, the FIA. Those four elements together are enough to turn any technical question into a full paddock crisis. And this is where the first real mystery opens. What exactly did the FIA see that made the issue serious enough to matter? Was it something in the car's design? Was it something in how the car was prepared? Was it something that appeared normal until rivals looked closer? Was it a detail that technically passed one test, but raised questions under another? The source does not answer that clearly. And because it does not answer, the script cannot invent it. But the absence of a clear answer is precisely what makes the atmosphere so tense. Because Formula One does not fear only cheating. It fears not knowing. Not knowing whether a car is legal. Not knowing whether a rival advantage is genius or forbidden. Not knowing whether the FIA's tests are strong enough to catch every clever interpretation. Not knowing whether the result everyone just watched was built on pure performance, or on something still hidden in the machinery. That is the emotional core of the first block. The complaint opened the door. The FIA looked inside. Mercedes became the focus. But the real fear is not one secret part. The real fear is that Formula One may have found another gray area, one of those dangerous spaces where the rulebook, the engineers, the drivers, and the fans all start asking different versions of the same question. Was this brilliance, or was this too far? And that question is only the beginning. Because once the FIA's attention turns toward Mercedes, every rival team starts doing something that can change the rest of the season. They stop asking whether Mercedes was fast. They start asking why. That question is where every technical controversy in Formula One truly begins. Not with the accusation, with the explanation. Because when a car suddenly becomes the center of an official complaint, the first thing rival teams want is not drama. They want a reason. They want to know whether the pace came from setup, tires, driver confidence, track conditions, or something buried deeper inside the machine. And with Mercedes, that question becomes dangerous very quickly. Because Mercedes has never been a team people ignore. Even when it is not dominating, rivals still watch it with suspicion, because they know what that organization can do when it finds the right direction. They know Mercedes has the people, the tools, the experience, and the history to turn one small discovery into a major advantage. That is why the FIA finding something inside Mercedes does not land like a normal technical note. It lands like a warning. Because in Formula One, the most frightening discoveries are not always the biggest ones. Sometimes, the smallest detail is the one that changes everything. A tiny flex in the wrong place. A cooling solution nobody expected. A floor detail hidden from easy view. A measurement that looks legal in one condition, but questionable in another. A procedure that seems ordinary, until someone asks how it affects the car at speed. The source does not specify which of these, or whether it was anything like these at all. So the truth has to stay careful. But the pattern of fear is real. In Formula One, a car is not just a car. It is a moving argument with the rulebook. Every surface is shaped to gain something. Every gap is studied. Every edge is tested. Every millimeter is turned into a question. Can we do this? Can we prove this is legal? Can we make this work before anyone else understands it? That is why teams do not only race each other on Sundays. They race each other in interpretation. And interpretation is where Mercedes has often been terrifying. Not because the team must have done something wrong, but because the best teams rarely need to break rules to create panic. They only need to read the rules more aggressively than everyone else. That is the second layer of this story. The complaint may have started with concern. The FIA may have found something that demanded attention. But the real fear spreading through the paddock is much deeper. What if Mercedes found performance in a place the rest of the grid had already dismissed? What if rivals were looking at the obvious areas, while Mercedes had discovered something smaller, stranger, and more powerful? What if the advantage was not illegal in the clearest sense, but uncomfortable enough that the FIA had to decide whether the rules were too open? That is the kind of question that keeps team bosses awake. Because if a part is illegal, the solution is simple. Remove it. Punish it. Clarify it. Move on. But if a part is legal and misunderstood, the damage is worse for everyone else. Because then Mercedes has not broken the game. Mercedes has learned to play a version of the game others did not know existed. That is much more threatening. It means rival teams may have wasted months chasing the wrong answers. It means their development paths may be behind. It means the gap is not just on the timing screen, but inside the thinking of the team. And in Formula One, being outthought is sometimes more painful than being outpaced. That is why Hamilton and Verstappen being connected to the official complaint gives the story a different emotional charge. Hamilton understands Mercedes from the inside. He knows that the team's greatest strengths were never only horsepower, speed, or strategy. They were process, discipline, patience, the ability to find details others missed, then make those details look obvious after the fact. That kind of knowledge makes him dangerous in a controversy. Because he does not look at Mercedes like an outsider guessing through a fence. He knows what excellence inside that team can look like. He knows the difference between a normal upgrade cycle and something that feels more unusual. And Verstappen brings the opposite force. He does not need to know every internal Mercedes process to sense when a rival advantage feels wrong on track. Drivers at that level feel differences other people cannot explain. They can feel when a car launches better out of a corner. They can feel when it holds speed in a way that changes the fight. They can feel when the car beside them is doing something that does not match the expected pattern. That instinct does not prove guilt, but it creates suspicion. And suspicion, once formalized through an official complaint, becomes pressure. Pressure on the FIA. Pressure on Mercedes. Pressure on every rival team that wants to know whether it has been beaten by brilliance, or by a loophole it failed to find. Here is what makes the Mercedes element especially sensitive. The team's identity has always been tied to trust in engineering. Mercedes became a symbol of precision. Controlled, methodical, almost cold in the way it handled success. When the team was strong, it often looked less like chaos and more like a machine executing a plan. That image creates respect. But it also creates fear. Because when Mercedes finds something, people assume it was not an accident. They assume it was planned, tested, understood, and protected. They assume the team knew exactly how close it was to the line, and exactly how to defend it if the FIA asked questions.